Picture this. You finally say no to that friend who always cancels last minute. You stop answering work emails at 10 p.m. You tell your family you can't host every holiday dinner. And suddenly, you're labeled cold, selfish, or not the person you used to be. Sound familiar? Here's what's really happening. And this might make you a little angry. The people calling you cold aren't upset because you've changed. They're upset because they've lost access to something they never should have expected in the first place. Unlimited control over your time and energy. Carl Jung, one of history's most brilliant psychologists, understood this dynamic better than anyone. And what he discovered about boundaries will completely change how you see these reactions. Ready for the truth? The moment you start setting healthy boundaries is often the exact moment you begin becoming psychologically whole. If you've ever felt guilty for saying no, if you've been made to feel selfish for protecting your energy, this video is for you. Because what I'm about to share isn't just theory. It's a roadmap to understanding why boundary setting feels so uncomfortable and why other people resist it so strongly. Jung didn't just study human psychology, he lived it. He understood that becoming your authentic self requires disappointing people sometimes. And here's the part that most people never talk about. The relationships that can't survive your boundaries weren't healthy to begin with. Today, we're diving deep into Jung's insights about why setting boundaries triggers such intense reactions, what it really means when someone calls you cold, and how to navigate this essential part of psychological growth with confidence. Because here's the truth, you're not becoming cold, you're becoming whole, and some people will hate you for it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone called a person with poor boundaries cold? Never, right? Here's what Jung understood that most people don't. When someone calls you cold for setting boundaries, they're not describing your character. They're describing their experience of losing access to you. Think about that for a moment. The word cold in this context actually means unavailable for my needs. It means not responding the way I want you to respond. It's rarely about your actual warmth or kindness. It's about their discomfort with your newfound self-respect. Jung called this projection. When people can't tolerate their own discomfort with your boundaries, they project that discomfort onto you and make it your problem. They're essentially saying, your self-care makes me uncomfortable, therefore you are wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. The people who truly care about you, they might be initially surprised by your boundaries, but they adjust. They recognize that a healthier you contributes to a healthier relationship. The ones who can't adjust are revealing something crucial about why they were in your life to begin with. Stop and think about this with me. Why does someone else's no feel like a personal attack to certain people? Jung would say it's because they've become unconsciously dependent on your inability to say no. When you were overgiving, over-accommodating, always available, you weren't just being generous. You were unconsciously enabling a dynamic where others didn't have to consider your needs, your limits, or your humanity. This is what Jung called unconscious identification, where the boundaries between people become so blurred that one person's self-care feels like abandonment to another. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you've been someone's emotional support system for years. Always available, always understanding, always putting their needs first. Then one day you say, I can't talk right now. I need some time for myself. To them, this doesn't feel like a reasonable request. It feels like abandonment. Why? Because they've never had to develop their own emotional regulation skills. They've outsourced that job to you. When you set a boundary, you're not just changing your behavior, you're forcing them to confront their own emotional immaturity. And that's deeply uncomfortable for people who have been avoiding that confrontation for years. Here's something Jung discovered that might surprise you. Chronic people-pleasing often isn't about being kind. It's about avoiding something much deeper. What are you really avoiding when you say yes to everything? Jung would ask this question because he understood that our light behaviors often cast shadows we don't want to acknowledge. For many people-pleasers, the shadow hiding behind all that agreeableness is a terror of being disliked, abandoned, or seen as selfish. The constant yes isn't pure generosity. It's often a strategy to control how others perceive you. But here's the thing about shadows. They don't disappear when we ignore them. They just grow stronger and more controlling. When you start setting boundaries, you're forced to face this shadow. You have to sit with the possibility that someone might not like your decision. You have to tolerate the discomfort of potentially disappointing someone. This is terrifying at first because it means confronting the parts of yourself that have been driven by fear rather than authentic love. But Jung understood something profound. True compassion can only exist when it's freely chosen, not compulsively given. When you set boundaries, you're not becoming less loving. You're creating space for love that's real rather than fear-based. And let's be honest, that sounds much better, doesn't it? Have you ever noticed how some people seem upset that you're not the same person you used to be? Jung would say, "Good." That's exactly the point. Jung distinguished between what he called the persona, the mask we wear to fit social expectations, and our authentic self. Many people spend years perfecting a persona built around being endlessly accommodating, always available, never difficult. When you start setting boundaries, you're essentially retiring an old version of yourself. The people in your life have to adjust to relating to your real self rather than the carefully crafted people-pleaser who always said yes. This transition feels jarring for everyone involved. But consider this question. Which version of you is more honest? The one who agrees to things they don't want to do, who smiles when they're frustrated, who says it's fine when it's clearly not, or the one who can say no with kindness, express their true feelings, and show up authentically even when it's less convenient for others? The authentic version might be less predictable, less controllable, less convenient for others, but it's the only version that's actually alive. The real, authentic you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your boundary isn't just self-protection, it's a truth detector. And the people who react with anger, they're telling you exactly what your relationship was really built on. Watch their response carefully. Are they upset about losing you or losing access to what you provided? Are they mourning your friendship or mourning their personal convenience store? Jung recognized something most people refuse to see. Many relationships aren't connections between two people. They're unconscious service agreements. One person provides endless emotional labor, availability, and resources. The other person takes it and calls it love. Your boundary breaks the contract they never admitted existed. Suddenly, they can't access your energy on demand, and their true feelings about you as a person become crystal clear. The ones who rage about your unavailability were never really interested in your humanity. They were interested in your function, and now that the function is limited, they have no idea what to do with the actual person standing in front of them. Let me stop here and ask you directly. How many times have you set a boundary and then felt guilty about it? If you're nodding right now, you're dealing with what Jung might call a guilt complex. This complex operates with its own twisted logic. Good people always help others. Setting limits is selfish. Other people's needs matter more than mine. Sound familiar? But here's what Jung would want you to understand. These beliefs aren't yours. They're inherited programming from families, cultures, or systems that benefited from your self-sacrifice. Breaking free from this guilt complex requires recognizing that these thoughts are not universal truths. They're learned patterns that once served a purpose, but may now be sabotaging your growth. You can care deeply about people and still say no to unreasonable requests. You can love your family while also limiting your availability. You can be generous and also protect your energy. The goal isn't to become selfish, it's to become consciously generous rather than compulsively giving. Here's where most people get stuck. They think boundary setting is an either-or proposition. Either I'm caring or I'm self-protective. Either I'm generous or I'm selfish. Either I'm connected or I'm independent. But psychological maturity involves what Jung called integration, holding multiple truths simultaneously. You can be both caring and boundaried. You can love someone deeply and still disappoint them sometimes. You can be a good friend while also prioritizing your own well-being. This isn't contradiction, it's wholeness. The people who call you cold for setting boundaries are often stuck in black and white thinking. In their mind, if you're not endlessly available, you don't care. If you prioritize yourself sometimes, you're selfish. They can't hold the complexity of a person who is both generous and self-respecting. But that's their limitation, not yours. Here's something that might change everything for you. True warmth doesn't come from endless availability. It comes from authentic presence. Think about the people in your life who have healthy boundaries. Are they cold? Or do they have a quality of presence that's actually more valuable than constant availability? When you're chronically overgiving, part of you is always resentful, tired, or disconnected from your own needs. Your warmth becomes performative rather than genuine. You're giving from depletion rather than fullness. But when you show up by choice rather than obligation, when you give from a place of genuine desire rather than fear-based compulsion, your presence becomes infinitely more valuable. There's a depth to the attention of someone with healthy boundaries that people pleasers can't match, because they're not simultaneously giving and resenting, helping and depleting themselves. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. Sometimes what we call being nice is actually avoiding being real. Carl Jung's work on the shadow reveals that excessive niceness often masks avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, of disappointing others, of advocating for ourselves. True kindness sometimes requires being temporarily misunderstood. When you're always nice, you're often not being kind to yourself. You're teaching others that your needs, your time, and your energy are less valuable than their comfort. This dynamic isn't sustainable for you, and it isn't actually helpful for them either. Real love sometimes means saying no. Real friendship sometimes means having difficult conversations. Real care sometimes means being willing to disappoint someone in service of long-term health, both yours and theirs. The discomfort you feel when someone calls you cold isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something different, and different always feels uncomfortable at first. Jung emphasized building what we might call holding capacity, the ability to tolerate discomfort without immediately trying to fix it or make it go away. Every time you set a boundary and sit with the discomfort that follows, you're building psychological muscle. You're proving to yourself that you can survive other people's disappointment, their anger, even their rejection. This capacity grows with practice. The first few times feel excruciating, but gradually you develop confidence in your right to have limits, to protect your energy, to show up as your authentic self even when others prefer your old masks. Here's what nobody tells you about boundary setting. It gets easier But it also gets clearer. You begin to see your relationships with startling clarity. Some people will adjust to your boundaries and discover they actually prefer the real you instead of the people-pleasing version of you. These relationships deepen and become more authentic. Others will continue to resist, to push, to make you feel guilty for your self-care. These relationships either transform or end. And while that's initially painful, it's ultimately liberating. You begin to attract people who value you for who you are, not for what you can provide. You develop relationships based on mutual respect, rather than unconscious obligation. Most importantly, you develop a relationship with yourself, based on honor, rather than abandonment. So the next time someone calls you cold for having boundaries, remember this: you're not cold. You're finally warm enough to recognize the difference between authentic connection and emotional exploitation. You're not becoming less loving. You're learning what love actually looks like when it's not mixed with fear, guilt, and compulsion. The journey from people-pleasing to authentic relating isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth it. Because on the other side lies something beautiful. Relationships built on choice rather than obligation. Giving that comes from fullness rather than emptiness. And love that's freely offered rather than desperately performed. Your boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation for genuine connection. And anyone who can't respect that foundation was never really building a healthy relationship with you anyway. If this resonated with you, if you felt the sting of being called cold for finally respecting yourself, subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of becoming authentically you. The person you're becoming through this boundary-setting journey. That person is worth protecting. That person is worth the discomfort. That person is not cold. They're finally, authentically warm. Admire that person. Admire yourself.